Homage to the Triple Gem. So I just recently got a question on Discord. Bhante, I had some questions regarding discernment. First, is the only type of discernment which leads to the destruction of defilements and cutting of fetters insight into the three characteristics? Secondly, are we supposed to A, actively produce discernment in meditation, or B, are we cultivating our minds in a way that it will cause discernment to arise naturally? Whichever it is, can you please explain how it is done? So, basically anytime somebody has an insight that separates their mind from one of their defilements, either in a small way or in a more large-scale way, that insight will somehow relate to the three characteristics. It doesn't mean that a person is necessarily going to be contemplating the three characteristics in a very overt way, like you might think of in some meditation techniques where you do X and then you contemplate how it's impermanent, or you contemplate how it's suffering, or you contemplate how it's not self. The way that these things tend to come together, they could potentially come together with an overt contemplation around the three characteristics, but they tend to come together more when a person is actually investigating the things that cause them to suffer in their life and looking for ways in which to overcome those things. So it's in learning how to solve the problems that exist in one's life, the things that have been causing one to suffer over and over again, that discernment arises. So discernment, or panya, sometimes translated as wisdom, is essentially the faculty that separates things. So it's what allows a person to separate things into different categories. So, you can say that this thing belongs over here and this thing belongs over there because of these characteristics. But its use in spirituality is actually to separate the mind from defilements. And that involves seeing what is causing one to suffer. Now, seeing what's causing one to suffer here doesn't mean in a kind of intellectual way in which one is just thinking intellectually, oh, what did I do? And, what did I do that? And how did I do that? And okay, I'm suffering because of this. I mean, that is actually not necessarily going to be so difficult to do in its grossest forms. And it's obviously not going to be enough. I mean, there's many people who are addicted to drugs, addicted to gambling, addicted to whatever it might be, and they're suffering, and they know that it's their addiction that's causing them to suffer. But they still can't stop doing it. So the discernment that actually leads to the destruction of defilements, that leads to the separating of the mind from the things that causes one to suffer, is the discernment that comes, that arises, that is developed essentially through that hand-to-hand combat in resisting the addiction. So if a person, for example, is addicted to alcohol or addicted to angry yelling or whatever it might be, it's when that kind of temptation to indulge in that addiction comes up and one resists it, one tries to pull the mind back from it, one tries various strategies to stop it, it's here that the active faculty of panya, or the active faculty of discernment, is strengthened. So essentially when one is doing that, what one is doing is wearing away the strength of the fetters, like the kind of glue that binds, you might say binds the mind to certain habit patterns or certain patterns of behavior. You can almost see it like a kind of glue. And the Buddha gives a simile of the rigging of a ship, where a ship is pulled up onto land and it's just inundated with rain, it's swept around, it's pushed around by wind, the rigging, and eventually the rigging starts to rot. And at a certain point, all that rigging is connected, and it essentially is supporting each other. So, the ways that the various knots are tied, it's a system, and that system supports its various elements. But as all of the various components of the system get worn away through, wind, through rain, at a certain point, all of the rigging collapses. So the discernment that leads to the destruction of defilements can happen in that way. It can happen in ways in which one is actively engaging in a fight against the defilement in meditation. One is trying to find a way to overcome it. And then at a certain point, the defilement just drops away. Now, this is not usually something that just happens like going on a retreat. Sometimes people get into setting goals. I mean, I've probably done this myself. And people try to set goals like, on this retreat, I'm going to achieve the jhanas, or on this retreat I'm going to become a sotapan, or whatever it might be. People set these kind of goals. it's probably not going to be, it's probably, if one sets a goal like that, then discernment will probably not arise within the time frame that one has set. It may, but likely it won't. These kind of things tend to happen more spontaneously. One can think of it almost like climbing a mountain. So, the various mountains that one has here in Sri Lanka, say like going on a journey through very mountainous territory. You kind of climb up a mountain, you think, okay, this looks pretty good. There we go, getting to the top of the mountain, and maybe it'll be smooth sailing from here on out. And you get to the top of the mountain, there's another mountain in front of you that's higher. Kind of keep climbing the mountains. And in climbing these mountains, eventually, the time comes when one actually does reach the end of the path, reach the end of the journey that one was trying to get to. So the wearing of the way of defilements, the gradual separation, the weakening of the glue that binds the mind to these things, is done by actively resisting them. One actively resists them, actively resists them, actively resists them. And then the way that can evolve sometimes is in almost like a pitched battle, where you've climbed one mountain, then the other, then finally there's a humongous mountain. And that mountain takes a combination of all the skills, all the endurance, all the effort, all the gear that you've accumulated climbing these smaller mountains. And it's more challenging than anything you've ever done. But at a certain point, you get to the top, you reach the summit. And in a similar way, one goes through one's life trying to basically fight the defilements that arise in the mind in various ways, through sila, through samadhi, through the development of wisdom, through investigating these things. And at a certain point, sometimes in the midst of a really pitched battle, one is just sick of suffering from this defilement and decides that no matter what, one is just not giving an inch. And, it doesn't matter if it lasts for, however long it lasts, one is not giving up, essentially. It's going to spend as much time, no past, no future, maybe. Just kind of a fight that's just not going to stop. And sometimes when one has that kind of mind state, suddenly the defilement breaks. Now, when those defilements break in that way, then at times, very unusual insights can arise. Unusual here doesn't mean unusual in the content necessarily, because if one explains the content of the insight, might not sound all that impressive. But it can be unusual in that it sometimes comes with strange memories, might come with things that one didn't expect, like that. And so the content of the insight, when one tries to explain it, might not be something all that awe-inspiring. I think I've given the analogy many different times before, or given the example of my life. When I was a young man, I was addicted to marijuana and struggling with it for a year. Just kind of trying to give it up. Eventually realized that it was actually probably the cigarettes that I was putting into the marijuana that were more addictive. But it was this year of struggle, and eventually it came to a head. And of course, you don't know when these things are coming to a head. It just seems like maybe the next mountain. And I decided that no matter what happened, I would kind of win for a bit. I'd be doing well in resisting the urge to smoke marijuana. Then I'd relapse. Then I'd win. Maybe it'd go a little longer. Then I'd relapse. And sometimes I have a big relapse. At this one point, I had this relapse. And I just got so sick and tired of being addicted to marijuana and relapsing and not being able to have control over my mind from this addiction, essentially, that I decided that no matter what happened, even if I relapsed, even if I smoked, I was going to start sprinting down this hill and sprinting up every day. And that was something that I'd really missed when I became a marijuana smoker, was being able to run and having enough lung capacity to get down the hill and get back up. So I started doing this, and then at one point I relapsed and smoked marijuana. I still ran down the hill, sprinted down, sprinted back up. And because my lungs were so raw from all this running, I got this really terrible chest infection, kind of maybe lung infection. And it lasted, I think it was maybe 2 days or maybe even 3 days. And at the end of the 3 days, this kind of insight, one might say, 2 or 3 days, arose in my mind. Oh, this is what happens when you smoke marijuana. Marijuana makes you sick. And it was after that kind of insight that addiction lost pretty much all of its power. I think I only smoked it one more time after that, and then never smoked again. So Defilements can be subdued in an active manner like this, and what you might say the discernment that allows one to separate defilements from the mind can be subdued in an active way, as in meditation, in an active form of meditation. Or when one is actively engaging with one's meditation topic, just going around, walking around or doing whatever one has to do. Discernment can also arise through more intuitive means. So you tend to see this more sometimes in the stories of like great scientific discoveries. But it's not only in great scientific discoveries that this happens. This also happens in spiritual discoveries, discoveries for oneself about how to eliminate defilements. In that you'll have a great scientist who is thinking about things for a long time, trying to solve a particular problem, trying to understand how a particular thing works. And their mind is just always thinking about it. It's just kind of every aspect, their mind is always engaged with this, and the various things that they see, they tend to see various things in terms of how it can help them to solve this problem. You can get very, very engrossed in trying to solve problems in this way. So when their mind is like that, then actually even in the background, even in the subconscious mind, the subconscious can even get to working on these problems. And sometimes there can be a catalyst that suddenly brings everything together in a really unexpected way. So one of the most famous examples is with Sir Isaac Newton, and seeing this apple fall and then developing developing some of his theories of the laws of physics based on just seeing this apple fall. And people had seen apples fall so many different times before. It's not an unusual thing to see an apple fall if one is living in or around apple orchards or apple trees. But it was the fact that he had been working on this for so long and that he had built all these other pieces together in his mind that allowed that to be the catalyst which sparked the discernment that led to these theories. So that same type of thing can happen to people in their meditation practice. It can seem like there's kind of nothing happening, and one is battling and trying to wear away the defilements, trying to develop good qualities. And then one is going along doing something that seems relatively innocuous, and there's some event that happens that suddenly brings everything together. And then in that moment, there can be a separation of the mind from defilements. So there's one monk actually in the modern era who attained arahantship, and he actually attained arahantship in the Pindapata line at a monastery. So just a normal everyday thing that monks will tend to do, just going on Pindapata, Pindapata, going to the Dhanasala or wherever it might be and taking food from the table at the monastery. There was something in that act that suddenly sparked the realization that allowed him to separate his mind from defilements permanently. It's not going to be just the information that's contained in that insight that is necessarily all that important. It's the gradual wearing away of defilements that allows that insight to arise at the same time the defilements are destroyed or significantly weakened, or if it's a particular habit or defilement, that particular habit or defilement to be undone, essentially. So if you just went to another person who had that same defilement and told them about this insight, you can go to somebody who's addicted to marijuana and say, marijuana makes you sick. Well, I mean, might say, well, thanks, good to reflect on that. Or they might say, well, yeah, I know. That's probably the more likely answer you're going to get. And they'll probably still remain addicted to it. Because that kind of insight, as profound as it might seem to a person who gets it in conjunction with the stopping of their defilements, is not necessarily that useful as information on its own. These things kind of sometimes come up from the bottom up. It's like a knowledge that comes from the bottom up rather than from the top down when the mind is separated from some of its negative habits, or more significantly from its defilements. So the classic one there is in stream entry, which the knowledge that a stream enterer gets is that whatever is subject to origination is subject to cessation. And that can arise in different ways for different people. It's not just verbal that knowledge can arise. It can arise in what one might call nonverbal ways. There's different ways in which knowledge and skill can arise in people's minds. And this is something that one sees, especially in the knowledges that the Buddha gained on the night of his awakening, remembering eons of past lives and understanding fully how karma works in a single night. So this is possible because there's ways in which knowledge can arise that are not this top-down where we're thinking of things, hammering them into the brain through the prefrontal cortex, and then gradually that seeps to the subconscious. In any event, the way to cultivate this discernment, the important thing about that, is not just to try to think back to cause and effect. Like, what am I doing that's causing me to have this defilement? Oh, I'm gambling. Oh, I'm drinking alcohol. I mean, that's not enough. And then, maybe you're trying to take that back further and think, well, what did I do in my childhood? I mean, that could be coming from lifetimes ago, whatever the cause was. The cause is not so important. What is important is the active effort to resist that defilement, the active effort to stop it. And that's where all these meditation topics that the Buddha's taught come in. It's where all the teachings in the canon tend to come in, when one is actively trying to reduce the defilement. Where the sila comes in, where the vinaya comes in for monks. These are all aids in the effort to basically separate the mind from the things that are causing it to suffer. So that is where one needs to focus if one wants to develop discernment. How can I stop my mind from engaging in this thing that I like to do, but that is causing me pain and suffering? And as one experiments, it often requires experimentation, going back and forth, trying different things out. It's in looking for what it is that works, that this faculty that's able to separate things out grows stronger. So in our practice, we don't have to look for esoteric things. We don't have to necessarily be going looking for esoteric things like, I want this special kind of knowledge. We don't have to be kind of sending our mind back and thinking, where did I, first start this bad habit? We have to be looking for ways to actually stop it. And if we do this, this is what allows discernment to arise. The discernment that is able to wear away the defilements, help the mind to wear away the defilements by finding paths forward. The discernment that is able to separate the mind from defilements more significantly, especially in major bad habits. Sometimes the discernment that arises spontaneously, kind of with unusual knowledge. But most important is the discernment that arises that separates the mind permanently from its negative tendencies forever. And this type of discernment, all three types of discernment, can be cultivated in the here and now by focusing in on how we can stop doing what we're doing that causes us to suffer.